My name is Dustin Wheeler, and my family calls me Duck Tuck. My love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have for wine is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite certified sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment, so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go! Welcome into this episode of the Duck Vine. Now, we have been taking you on a deep dive into everything wine, really talking about how we make it, the history, how it started, doing some varietals, things like that, and how all that kind of comes together. We're going to continue that dive, but as we get into it, there's going to be some things that come up, especially in the regions. And so today we're talking about something that can be confusing within those, even to the most seasoned wine drinkers, and that's wine classifications. So we're going to break down the terms like AOC, AOP, DOC, DOCG, AVAs. A lot of letters. A lot of letters. This is Sesame Street for the wine world, but we're getting into it. So, AOCs and AOPs. This is a French classification. So let's start with the basics. We'll begin with these two, the AOC, AOP, but we're going to start specifically with the AOC. The Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, which means or translates to Control Designation of Origin. This is the French system that designates wines based on where they come from and the rules they have to follow to ensure its quality. It's essentially the French version of a protected geographic status. The specificity of an AOC product is determined by the combination of physical and biological environment with established production techniques or ways to make wine within our community of winemaking. The AOC certification is an authenticity that is granted to certain geographical indications, but not only for wines, but especially in French cheese and butters and other agricultural products. There is a thing that you'll hear of the IANAO, which governs that as well. So think of the AOC as French's kind of like guarantee. Now, the confusion is some people think it's a guarantee of quality. Does not always mean that the wines are better, but they're upheld to certain standards within the growing and production of the wines. So this started in the 1930s and it essentially says if this wine is labeled with AOC region, it has to be from that specific region with these specific grapes under these certain practices to make sure it meets our standard. The kind of origins of AOC date further back than that. Back to like 1411 when the production of Roquefort cheese or blue cheese was regulated by parliamentary. And the first French law determining viticultural designations of origins dates to August 1st, 1905. On May 6, 1919, the law for the protection of the place of origin was passed, specifying the region and commune in which a given product must be manufactured. It's been revised many, many times, and then July 30th, 1935, the CNAO created representatives of the government and major wine growers to manage the administration of the AOC process. This is an initiative of Joseph Capus in the Rhone wine region. Baron Pierre Leroy was a trained lawyer and also a wine grower from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and he got the first legally recognized AOC, which occurred in 1936. So let's break all that down from 1411 to 1936. There were steps happening to get us to where we are today. 1936, we see the first official wine designation. going to Cote d'Aron, Chateauneuf de Pop. But all those steps along the way, you can see, even going back to the 1400s, how important region was to the French. Now, this gets replicated all across the world now, as a way for us to kind of sort of define terroir in a way. That's really what we use it for. So, long story short, this is where government recognized terroir begins. So there are definitely famous AOCs like Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, Chablis. And these regions have very strict guidelines around everything, the grape variety to the winemaking techniques. And the terroirs have AOCs vary dramatically in size. That's not really governed. It doesn't have to be so big or so small. I mean, there's some minute details, but some cover vast expanses with a variety of climatic and soil conditions. Like even in Bordeaux, you'll hear left bank versus right bank because the soils are different. While others are small and highly uniform. For example, we'll go back to the Cote d'Aron AOC. It covers some 75,000 acres, 30,000 hectares, 171 villages. It's one of the largest AOCs out there. However, within the Cote d'Aron AOC is one of the smallest AOCs as well, Chateau Grillet, which occupies less than 4 hectares or 9.9 acres of land. Just to put that in perspective for you, 4 hectares is about 8 football fields put side by side by side, like in kind of a grid. It gives you an idea of how small this one little region is, but it's important enough to be recognized. Now, AOCs used to be the top classification for French wine, but in 2012, just to make it more confusing, a new group of letters pops up, and the French made the change. The AOC was replaced by the AOP, or Appellation Origine Protégée, which translates to the protected designation of origin. What's the difference? Not too much, really. The shift from AOC to AOP was mostly an administrative thing. The AOP is a part of the EU's broader effort. So the AOP governs more than just French, and they're trying to be a part of a bigger picture of Europe's wine scene as a whole versus just pertaining to like the AOCs were. So it aligns a lot more with the EU's legal framework, especially for legal things when it comes to agriculture products, and especially in today's world when that's a hot topic and everything is getting shipped overseas and tariffs and da 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 da. It's a way to fall kind of more in line. In practice, AOC, AOP wines are virtually the same. If you see either label on a bottle, you're looking at a wine that comes from that very specific place. And then remember, it has to follow a sometimes very strict set of rules to qualify. So don't really get those two, or don't really overthink those two too much. Maybe one's a newer approach, and maybe you will see AOPs that did not have AOCs before. So a little bit more progressive. As we head south, though, south and a little bit to the side there, we'll head over to Italy, and we'll head into Italy's classification. So Italy has the DOC. We have a very similar system, but different set of acronyms. The most common one you'll see on Italian wines is DOC. Denominazione di Origine Controllata. It's Italy's version of the AOC. Denominazione di Origine, or DO. It's rarely used, but that's just your designation of origin. So there's kind of a couple different tiers here. So we'll talk about IGT, which is the indication of geographic location. Then you have the DOC, the controlled designation of origin. And then you have one called the DOCG, which is the controlled and guaranteed designation of origin. So you'll see those a lot on Italian wine. Sometimes they're wrapped around the foil, sometimes they're going vertically on the back of the foil. The DOC's blue lettering on the sticker, DOCG is like a brown. The system was introduced in 1963, shortly after the Treaty of Rome established Italy as a founding member of the EEC, the European Economic Community. Let's just add more letters, and was modeled on French's AOC laws. It got overhauled in 1992 to match the new EU laws, and introduced the more DOP designations for food and agriculture products, also including wines. Further EU reforms then harmonized agriculture policy in 2008 meant that the designation used in member states and thus Italian designations were registered with the EU by the end of 2011. Da 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 da. A lot of legal jargon just to say that everyone's playing on the same field through agriculture products. And so we have a common vocabulary to identify these regions. So that IGT that we first mentioned, it was created in 1992, and it was used to recognize unusually high quality classes of wines, specifically Super Tuscans. It was equivalent to the French Vin de Paz designation, officially in Italy's Aosta Valley, where French is an official language. IGT wines were labeled with the locality of their creation, but most do not meet the requirements of stricter DOC or DOC designations, which are generally intended to protect traditional wine formulations like Chianti or Barolo. Since 2008, both IGT and the Vin de Paz are equivalent to the EU's Protected Geographical Indication, or PGI. Many producers have switched to using the Italian version, the IGP, and these classifications is seen to be a higher quality than Vino de Tavola or table wine. What's interesting about this is Super Tuscans are very high end, very sought after wines. And because in this area where Super Tuscans are, would be in the Chianti, Brunello, this kind of like world of DOCs, but they don't use the grapes. However, beyond DeSanti and Sassicaia and these big names that you've come to know gained so much attention that the government and wine bodies said we have to somehow acknowledge that. So there is one winery that I'm aware of. There could be more. Still learning with you guys here, but one winery that's protected as a DOC, and that is Sassicaia itself. So it's really interesting to see how this is changing and constantly evolving, and these things have popped up. And I mean, you can even, I know it's a lot of letters and a lot of legal jargon in there, but you can dissect it and see 2008. I mean, really wasn't that long ago when we've been making wine in these areas since 800 BC. So it's still evolving. It's not a perfect system, but it helps delineate some things there. So once we get past the IGT, we are now back to the DOC. So DOC wines are made in specific regions in Italy. Like the AOC, they must adhere to strict guidelines on grape varietals, winemaking processes, locations of the vineyards, elevation makes a difference, so on and so forth. So take Chianti for example. Chianti DOC wines must be made with at least 70% Sangiovese grapes. There's specific boundaries, and that's where you get into the difference between Chianti and Chianti Classico. It's a more minute cutout inside of Chianti's Chianti Classico with other things thrown in, but it's a smaller region. And it's not just about the region, so don't get me wrong on that. There's other things in play. These rules set up processes to make sure that everything is in check and balance, from how it's grown, how it's picked, what is it aged in, how long is it aged, things like that. So, again, not necessarily a guarantee it will be a good wine, but they are trying to guarantee that there is a level of control that says what you're getting can be guaranteed into these factors. And that's an important thing. It's happened before. And even if you take the fraud out of people trying to impersonate famous wines, the other thing that was going on is during certain points in history when wines would trend up from certain regions, like Suave was more popular than Chianti in the US in the early 70s. And it uses a really unique grape called Garganega. But during that time, it blew up. And so the winemakers in Italy were going, well, I don't have Garganega, but when I kind of want to ride this train. So they were labeling their wine as Suave, even though it wasn't from Suave, or even if they were in Suave, they didn't have Garganega grapes and trying to pass it off. So that's part of what this process is also trying to help. It's not just people faking wine, but it's people just using the wrong things, and you're expecting a particular product or end product and wine, and then you're not getting what you think you're getting. So this helps align that so you know specifically what you're buying. So if we go into DOCGs, or the controlled and guaranteed designation of origin, these wines have to pass a series of tests to also go along with that. The aging requirements are always a little bit amped up, and then it has to be grown and picked in even more special ways, or just unique ways that really kind of take it to the next level. A lot of times what you'll run into is like the DOC will be aged for a year, where the DOCG might be 2 years to 2.5 years. So you're automatically getting a unique experience, even if you bought the same release at the same time, because like Rosso di Montalcino and Brunello di Montalcino, right now you can get 2020 Brunellos, but you can get 2022 Rossos. So it's really interesting to see those get released side by side, even though they're different vintages. DOCG is really just that kind of elite level of wine classification. It's the final stamp. And there's been some other things thrown in there. When we get in particular regions, like when you get to Chianti, there's Chianti Classico Grand Selection, and that's another step. So it doesn't change the DOCG sticker, but it does add another little thing that they have to go through. So let's switch gears, head across. We're in the U.S. U.S. has its own system. A lot less formal than what the French have going on. But this is what you'll see. You'll see it sometimes on labels. It doesn't have to always be there, but AVA is the American Viticulture Area. AVA was designated as a wine growing region in the U.S., a specific county, or even a single vineyard. Started in the 1980s. But believe it or not, this is actually defined by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. So an independent bureau within the Department of Treasury. It's kind of interesting that these are the people that are influencing our wine production. The cool thing about AVAs is that they're defined by the U.S. government based on some specific geographic and climatic conditions. Napa is an AVA, so is Sonoma. They're both California, but they have different climates. The terroir is different, the land's different, which influences the type of wine produced here, but there's not necessarily aging requirements. Unlike the European system, AVA don't dictate what grapes as well can be grown, or really how it's made. So we really get a lot broader selection of wines and grapes, and it even leads to winemakers from other regions wanting to come here. La Ventura is a great example. A guy who was in Bordeaux and didn't agree with the AOCs of Bordeaux wanted to have Syrah. You can't do that in Bordeaux, so he came to California, and he makes wine now in California because there's more flexibility or freedom in there. So, um, it's really more of a focus on the region's geography and climate versus necessarily all the rules and regulations on how it's grown and aged. That being said, some AVAs are definitely more specific than others. For example, Willamette Valley is an AVA famous for peanut production. If it's labeled Willamette Valley, you know it's from that region. Doesn't tell you much about the grape variety or the winemaking technique. That's really up to the winemaker. But we're seeing more and more regions kind of take the AVA a step further. And Willamette and Oregon's one of those. So they'll actually um, guarantee at least if it does say a type of grape on it, it guarantees more than other AVAs. So it makes it a little difficult in US wine buying because it's like you go to this region and if it says Cab Sauv, it only has to be 70% Cab Sauv. And then maybe you go up to Oregon and it says Pinot Noir. Well, then Oregon says it's got to be at least 80% Pinot Noir. So it can kind of be a little misleading. How much is 10% making a difference when you're talking hundreds of liters? Some people definitely can tell the difference, but that is definitely more defined in the EU's current standard than what we have in the US. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I mean, some people would go on either side of that because you get the freedom and you can add things and you can change your vintages. I know of a lot of American wines that not only the percentage is changing every year, but the grape makeup is changing. And some people don't like that because they're like, oh, I fell in love with this wine in 2021. Now it has no Merlot. It is very intense and very astringent, where in the vintage I had was very smooth and velvety. So it can make it difficult in that sense. But then the winemaker can say, like, hey, this year Merlot was god awful. And so we couldn't put it in. And we rather put out a good solid wine with this grape than just have to fall into these guidelines and have to put Merlot in because the government said so. So it's ups and downs. You know, it's pluses and minuses, just like most things in life. So, why does all this matter? Kind of like we touched on, these classifications are here to ensure the wine you are drinking is authentic. It's a way to give kind of a trace back to the roots of the wine and the wine making. And they, like I said, help kind of set expectations for flavors and styles. So you'll know, like if you're a fan from Bordeaux, you know the wine that you're drinking comes from AOC or AOP, and you know it will be that kind of signature of that Bordeaux style. And even when you get even smaller, you know, a Saint Joseph next to a Haute Brion, you know those are even two smaller regions, and those, even though they're both left paint, will vary even more. So especially as you try more wines, you can get more and more honed in on what you really get excited about and what you really like. Again, these classifications protect the integrity of the regions themselves. By having these strict regulations in place, they prevent things like cheap imitations or wines that just don't reflect the true characteristics of a region. We even talked about in the last episode with blending rosé and how people can get up in arms about that. So next time you're going out and you're going to pick up a bottle of wine, take a moment, look at the label, see if you see any of those AOC, AOPs, DOCs, COCGs, ABCDEFG, AVAs, you know, all the letters. And then you'll start to be able to realize what you're getting is a little bit more exact each time. And then you can find, again, more direct paths to the wines that you really, really enjoy. So that wraps up our episode today on the Duck Vine. I hope you loved this episode. I hope it helped clear up a little bit with all these letters floating around. What are they meant for? I think as we dive into the actual regions, like Bordeaux or Burgundy or Piedmont or whatever it is, it'll help set you up so we can kind of demystify these wine classifications out there. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, give us those 5 stars, share it with your fellow wine lovers. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned something. Most important thing, we got to drink some wine. And so until next time, cheers.